As a pastor and as a just member of the human race, there has been a lot of funerals that I've attended to. Some of them I've been the pastor and had to administer the funeral service, and there are other times when I've attended a church or I've attended a funeral just as a friend. And one of the funerals that stands out heads and shoulders above all other funerals was a funeral that I attended at a little town where everybody knew everybody. And it was a sad thing because they were putting to rest an elderly lady, and everybody knew her and they called her Granny. And at the funeral, little Johnny, we'll call him Johnny, was there, and he was devastated to see that Granny was going to be buried today. She died, that cut him apart, and today he was at the funeral, having to watch his Granny be put to rest. And as he was there in the funeral service, and as I was watching him, I could see that young Johnny was starting to get a little bit more tense as the service went along. And when the time came for them to lower the coffin into the ground, I could see that young Johnny was starting to get very desperate. There was something on his mind, and he wanted to say something, and he wasn't sure when to say it. You could see him holding his father's hand, and he was looking down into the grave, and he was sort of quivering, and he was building up. The tension was building. The tension was building, and you knew he was just about to blow sooner or later. He couldn't hold it back. And he looked down into the grave as the coffin went down, and then he said, "Stop! If heaven is up, why is she going down to hell?" And when he said that, an incredible silence came across the cemetery. No one talked. All the adults were standing there looking at one another. What an awkward question. How do we answer this? His mum and dad were looking at themselves going, "Well, you know, answer." And the other one would say, "Well, you answer." And there was this hush. People were afraid to talk up loud. How do we answer young Johnny? So young Johnny was a Christian lad. He was born as a Christian. He was brought up as a Christian. And he went to Sunday school every Sunday. And when he went to church every Sunday, he was told that if you were good, then you went up to heaven. Yeah? Have you heard that before? He was told also that when the good go to heaven, when the relatives go to heaven, that they are up there and they're looking down upon you. And they are guiding you. They're giving information. They're telling you what to do. They're making sure that you are safe. So he knew that Granny should be going up. He also knew that there was a hell. They used to teach him in school, in Sabbath school, in Sunday school. Getting so excited here. In Sunday school, that there was a hell. And hell is a place where all the bad people go. And it was where? It was down, isn't it? When you go to hell, you don't go up, do you? No. At least my wife is shaking her head. She knows where she's going. Eh? Hell, they always say, is down. And if you go to hell, it is hot, isn't it? It's not a place you want to be. And the bad people go to hell. And he was told there was a place called purgatory, a halfway house, so as to speak, if you're not too good and not too bad. So why was she going down to hell when she should have been going up to heaven? You know, the question of where we go when people die is something that is not just that Christians talk about and think about. It is not just something that we talk about when someone dies. There is that thing about reincarnation. Some people believe that you are reincarnated. What does that mean? That you might keep coming back. Andy Krause is born, Andy Krause lives, Andy Krause dies, Andy Krause comes back, Andy Krause, and we continuously go around in a circle. Some people believe that in the carnation, if you've been really good on this world, that you will come back as a richer and better person. Yeah? And it's also been said in reincarnation that if you were a bad person in this world, well, then you come back as something else. Be an animal, be an insect, whatever the case may be. I don't know if you can see the irony on this one here. He says, you're going back as a mayfly. Have a nice day. What's the irony there about the mayfly? A mayfly only lives for a day. So the poor chap goes up, comes back. It's only a joke. All right? You can laugh. People are interested in what happens once we die. Does something go somewhere? Can we communicate with the dead? And you probably have seen it before, and you probably have heard it about before, where people are so keen that they want to talk to someone who's passed away, that they have what used to be called Ouija boards, yeah? And you could go to a Ouija board, and you could put your finger on there, and you could ask the spirits a question. And the spirits would answer by you moving your finger around, spelling something out, or yes and no. And people say, well, there you go. They must have gone to heaven, because who are we talking to? It's our loved one, hasn't it? The one that's gone to heaven. My friends, who are they actually talking to? They're talking to Satan. Let's get that straight right away. All right? The Ouija board is not a communication through which God speaks to us. Yeah? Because God is what? The God of who? He's the God of the living. Yeah? God does not use dead people to communicate to the living. Please get that clear in your mind. Ouija boards, as fun as they might appear to young people, it was dragging them away from God, and it was dragging them into the realms of Satan. Ouija boards, you don't find that much these days. But you will find back in May 2015, there was Charlie Charlie. Who remembers Charlie Charlie? Yeah, I would have thought so. If you were in a high school lately, Charlie Charlie was all the rage, where you put two pencils across, a yes and no, and you communicate with the dead. It was fun. The kids thought it was fun. Look at this. Charlie, Charlie, I can talk to somebody. But who were they talking to? What were they doing? They were communicating with the dead. Who was the dead from? It wasn't from God, my friends. Yeah, it was the devil. It was the devil. And there was great concerns about this Charlie, Charlie thing that was dragging the young people away. It was clouding up their minds. Now, if there's one thing you can believe in life, and this is it, isn't it? If it's on TV, it's scriptural, yeah? Come on. If you see it on TV, it must be true. TV doesn't lie, surely to goodness. Yeah? I remember when I was working over in Albania, and I was giving there a talk about Christ and his life here on earth. And after the service, one of the young chaps came to me and said, Pastor? I said, yes, because I thought he was all keyed up and he wanted to know more about the service I just had. And he said, Pastor? And I said, yes. And he said, you're wrong. And I said, what? He said, you're wrong. I said, why? He said, because I saw the film on TV and what they showed on TV wasn't what you said, so you're wrong. I said, really? He said, yes, because what's on TV is always the truth. And I said, well, I actually go by this. This is the Bible. And if it contradicts what's on TV, my friends, then TV is wrong, yeah? What we see on TV is not always the truth. We see mediums on TV. We see films like The Supernatural. We see films like South Park, The Ghost Whisperer, Sabrina, and there are so many other films that are on that are subtly talking about mediums, about people who contact the dead. And it is interesting when you look at these programs on TV, programs about mediums, programs about people who communicate the dead. It is interesting that they are the ones who always solve the problem. Yeah? Have you seen that? They're always the good people. They're always the kind people. Yeah? When I have an issue, when I have a problem, I run up to my medium and I say, what do I do? And they solve my problems for me. Interesting, isn't it? So TV is slowly indoctrinating people as they watch TV and say, listen, you don't have to fear mediums because they're good people. They're helping you. But are they? No. Never, ever, my friends, get involved with mediums. No matter how good they might appear, no matter what wonderful things they seem to do, leave them well alone. The scripture says enough about mediums. Do not consult with them. I've always been interested when you go past big cemeteries, old cemeteries. First of all, it interests me just how much money people spend on the dead. It is incredible, some of the crypts and some of the headstones and graves that people build for their loved ones. I know we cherish our loved ones. Let me just get that straight away. We love our loved ones who have passed away. But man, some of the money that they spend on their dead ones, their loved ones, you could build 2 houses with. They're incredible. And not just on top of that, in some places they leave food and drink out there so that the spirit of the dead one has something to eat or drink. Interesting. They spend money on the dead one so he or she can eat or drink. And then what impresses me is this light thing that they put on their tombs. Have you ever gone past a cemetery and you see all these little lights flickering in the night? Think about it while I have a drink. Have you never gone past a cemetery where they got lights going? Oh. Well, next time you're travelling around in this great wondrous world and you're looking at God's gift of wonder and you're near a big city, one evening go past one of the big old cemeteries and just see how many little lights there are flickering on the graves. Why have they got lights flickering on the graves? Because they believe that when the soul who is in that grave goes out at night and does whatever they do, they need to have light at their grave to find their way back, to find their grave. All right? And if there is no light, they can't find their grave. And if they don't find their grave, they can't go back into their grave. So the poor spirit is now left. Ironic. What do people believe about these spirits that come out their graves? Aren't they the ones that are supposed to be helping us? Aren't they the ones that they say who come and visit you and give you advice and direction? And yet they can't even find their own way back to their own grave without a light. Mates, I'm not too sure I would take directions from a spirit who can't find his way back or her way back to their own grave. That's a bit sad. So what about this spirit going somewhere? What about there's something going to heaven when we put people into the ground? Well, we need to talk about what is called the soul issue. And the soul issue can be clarified very quickly when we go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. What is happening there? Genesis 2, chapter 7 is when God creates mankind, doesn't he? He's made everything else, and he decides that he's going to make a human being. And we find that when he makes the human being, he reaches into the ground and he forms and shapes the shape of a man in the ground. And that shape becomes a human form. It has legs, it has arms, it has hairs, it has organs inside the body, it has eyes, but there is one thing missing from this person laying on the ground. What is that? He hasn't got life. Yeah? It's just a body laying on the ground. Then God does something incredible to get that body up and running. What does he do? He breathes into the body. And what is it that he breathes into the body? It's the breath of life. It is the spirit. People say, but it's the spirit. You've got to remember that in those days the word can be used for several things: spirit, wind, breath, life. He breathes into the body, and we find that when the body has oxygen, the body is able to get up, and he's a living, breathing human being. He's a living, breathing soul. So what about there's something inside of us? People say, you know, you've only got an outer case there. There's a spiritual soul inside of you, Nathan. Don't worry about your outer casing. It's what's inside that counts. And they believe that because there is something inside of us, what is a soul, that when a person dies, that whatever's inside of them goes to heaven or goes to hell. My friends, that is not biblical, no matter which way you want to look at it. All right? The inner thing that people talk about is a Greek mythology. Go back in the Greek mythology and you will see where they talk about where people have an inner soul, where we're just an outer casing. It's got nothing to do with the Bible saying that we have something inside of us that leaves us, that is us when it goes. We are the whole thing, the whole living soul. According to the Bible, the soul is always a living, breathing human being. You are all souls. When Scripture talks about souls, you are all souls. It's talking about the living, breathing human being. It is never talking about a separate part of us living within us. The Holy Spirit is in us, yes. Don't get that wrong. But there's not a little Andy. Maybe there's not a little Andy living inside the big Andy waiting to get out. All right? No. What you see is what you get. What about the out-of-body experience? The OBE, as they call it. The light at the end of the tunnel. You know, people talk about operations. Oh, I went in an operation, I came out of my body and I could see what they're doing. Or I just keeled over and they were doing resuscitation and I watched them and I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. You might have heard those stories. Yeah. I went to heaven and I came back out the brightness. I was there. Maybe they saw this. You get what's going on here? Somebody laying in bed, the nurse has got a big tunnel up to the light bulb and he sees the light at the end of the tunnel. Come on, just to lighten you up a bit. So what is this OBE? What is this light at the end of the tunnel business? Is it real? There was a book that came out not so long ago about a boy who came back from heaven. Some of you might have read it. It was a book that was published and it was a book that they were saying to people, you've got to get this because this is real. It's about a young boy who emerges from life-saving surgery with remarkable stories of his visits to heaven. Heaven is for Real is a true story of the 4-year-old son of a small-town Nebraska pastor who, during emergency surgery, slips from consciousness and enters heaven. He survives and begins talking about being able to look down and see the doctor operating and his dad praying in the waiting room. And that book, my friends, was a ripper. It was getting sold to Christians everywhere. And they were saying, there you go. There you go. He left his body. He went to heaven. He saw it. It must be real because he's a son of a pastor. Eh? Priester. But unfortunately, my friends, it's not what it all appears. And you'll find that on the 13th of January 2015, Alice Malarkin, that's the kid who apparently went to heaven and came back, admitted that he lied. Yeah? And the publishers on Friday afternoon, Tandil, released this statement: we are saddened to learn that Alan Malarkin, co-author of the book, co-author of The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven, is now saying that he made up the story of dying and going to heaven. Given this information, we are taking the book out of print. There was, in the newspaper, there was an exclusive thing that says, father of boy who says he says he made up memorial of time in heaven, now accused of profiting from scam, as mother fought for years to prove book about paradise was a lie. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, I think there were 2 stories about the same time. The Todd Burpo story, I believe, has not been retracted, but this parallel story was retracted. I
Yeah.
think the Tom Burpo story is still out there, people still buying it.
Yep.
But I have heard of that one as well.
Yeah.
So,
There must be some sort of connection there, all right? If you read that story that Nathan was talking about, you need to look at that with cautious eyes as well, all right? So what about the out-of-body experience? Look, there were some tests done that show how an out-of-body experience takes place. It's a little bit small for you to read, so I highlighted something. According to the New York Times, Dr. Olaf, a neurologist at that particular place in Sweden, I can't pronounce all those, explains an out-of-body experience, an OBE, as the brain's attempt to make sense of conflicting information. Dr. Blanca stumbled upon the phenomena during exams of two women with epilepsy. He found that every time he touched a certain spot in the brain with an electric current, the patient had an OBE. One patient reported the feelings of a shadow copying her every move, and the other reported that she was looking down upon herself. My friend, the brain can do amazing things, yeah? Can do amazing things. And you will find that an out-of-body experience usually takes place when there's a traumatic thing happening to the person, yeah? I was involved in a rollover with an ambulance. I was driving an ambulance many moons ago down at Elizabeth. It was a brand new ambulance. That made it even better. And we had a patient in the back, and we were going through Main North Road, Midway Road, Main North Road intersection. We had a red light, but I stopped, sirens on, road clear, everybody stopped, and we're moving across the intersection. And as I was driving across the intersection, I could see myself suddenly and slowly rotating around, and I thought to myself, what are you doing? Why aren't we moving forward? And then we came to a stop. Somebody had come through and decided they had a green light, so even though the ambulance is there, let's T-bone it and go on. So we got T-boned. Of course, that means we got hit. And as we rolled over, my brain was confused as to what was going on. So I could see myself rolling over and thinking, what's going on here? Your brain is trying to make sense of something that is traumatic in your time. People who have OBEs, you need to ask them where and when it took place. So let's get back to death. Death, we are told, is like a deep sleep. Remember the Lazarus story, and when Lazarus is dying, Jesus says to them, then he told them, our friend Lazarus is asleep, and I am going there to wake him up. They replied, that's the disciples, Lord, if he is asleep, he will get better. Jesus really meant that Lazarus was dead, but they thought he was talking only about sleep. John 11:11-13. When Christians, when Adventists in particular, talk about death as a sleep, that's what we mean. Jesus said death is just like a sleep. Why is it just like a sleep?
there's no awareness.
There's no awareness. And what happens when you normally go to sleep? There'll be a time when you get up, isn't there? All right. Don't we have a hope? We have a hope that other people don't have out there, my friends. And this is quite unique to the Adventist Church because we believe that we have a hope that we will be resurrected when Christ comes back. We don't have to worry about where does somebody go when they die. When they die, as Jesus said, it's like them going to sleep. Yeah? It's not permanent. People who sleep will get up. And Jesus is saying death is just like a deep sleep. You go to sleep and then you get up. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 5, 6 and 10 says, and this is what Nathan was talking about, for the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. Their love, their hate and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. In the grave, where you are going, there is neither working or planning or knowledge or wisdom. So, my friends, when we die, what happens to us? We go to sleep. We're put into the ground, our Mother Earth, yeah? We don't go anywhere. We don't plan anything. We're just laying there. Yeah. The hardest part is for those people who are left behind, yeah? We are torn apart when somebody dies. But for the person who dies, it is like going to sleep. They are put into the ground. And if you can imagine, it's like Mother Earth being a big blanket placed across them. And they sleep comfortably with a nice warm blanket upon them. Until when? Until when Christ comes back, doesn't he? How much knowledge do we have when we're in the grave? Are you sure? What about Lazarus when he was brought back from the grave? You've read that story about Lazarus over and over again. Let me ask you to go to John chapter 11, verse 43. And I want you to tell me exactly what Lazarus said when he came out the grave. You probably missed it. You read it and you glazed over it. John chapter 11, verse 43 and verse 44. What's Lazarus there saying to Jesus? Jesus says, come out the grave. And what does Lazarus say? You sure? When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. We agree with that. The dead man came out, his hands and his feet wrapped with strips of linen and cloth placed around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let them go. You haven't missed the point. What is the point there? What is it that Scripture's trying to tell us is happening there? My friends, if Lazarus had gone to heaven, think about this. If Lazarus had died and gone to heaven, and then Jesus calls him back from heaven, and remember that heaven is the paradise that we're all going to, isn't it? That we want to get to, where everything is perfect. There's no pain, there's no suffering. And yet Jesus says to Lazarus, come down, and Lazarus comes down from wherever he was. What do you think Lazarus would have said to Jesus? Yeah, he would have. I would have gone to Jesus and said, man, what are you doing? I was in the perfect paradise. It was wonderful up there. No pain, no suffering. And you brought me back to this earth. Are you kidding? What is wrong with you? He doesn't say it. Why? He didn't go anywhere. Yeah, he didn't go anywhere. He didn't call him from heaven either. All right? He called him out the grave where he was sleeping.
Also, if he would have called him from heaven, he would have come from heaven, he wouldn't have the bad answer.
Yeah. See, all these little things that we talk about all the time and read about, and we think, well, why are they there? Because they're there to help us to understand that he didn't go anywhere. On the other hand, if he went down to hell, as some people say we might go to, what do you reckon he would have said to Jesus once he came up out of hell and stood there next to Jesus?
Thank you.
Oh, man, that's what I would have said. I would have raced up to Jesus, thrown my arms around and said, man, thank you, that was hot. That was hot, brother. Thank you very much for bringing me back here. Yeah? Whew. He didn't say it. Why? He wasn't there. He didn't pop out of the ground. Where did he come from? He came from the grave. Hey, it's there, my friends. Sometimes what is not written there is there. Understand it. Hey? The story of Lazarus is a good one to have a look at. The only time we come back, of course, is when Jesus comes back. It's at the second coming. Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good will rise to live, and those who have done evil will rise to be condemned. And it's been asked to me, well, what about those people who weren't in the grave? Look, there are some people who weren't put into graves. They might have died at sea. They might have been in some sort of explosion and disappeared. They might have, who knows? People who go into cremations, they don't go into graves either. So do they come back when Jesus comes back? Yeah. There are some people who say to me, look, I'm not too sure about getting cremated, because if I'm cremated, I won't come back when Jesus comes back. I have to be in a grave. You don't have to be in a grave. It just says that when we're dead, Jesus will find us wherever we are, my friends. He'll put us together before we go up and meet him in the sky, yeah? And when you come out of your grave, wherever you are, you will be perfect. Scripture says that you will be perfect, yeah, when we meet Jesus, before we meet Jesus in the sky. So,
I just thought we've got Ezekiel 38 where God puts all these dead people back together again.
yep,
The Valley of the Dry Bones. He can do it.
he can do it. My word, he can do it. And he doesn't need your DNA, right? He doesn't need to know what you look like to put you back together. Why? Yeah, he already knew what you looked like before you were even born. He knew what you looked like before this world was even created, right? So we will come back as the perfect human being. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 7, and some of you scholars are going to come and say to me, yeah, what about verse 7 in chapter 12? It says, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. And people say, there you go. There you go. The spirit goes to God, yeah? So you're pretty wrong there, Pastor. And I'll say, well, hang on, we need to go back to the beginning. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. Until you return to the ground, who's speaking here? God. All right, he's talking to Adam and Eve, isn't he? And he's telling them you're going to have a bit of a hard time now that you did that bad thing in the Garden of Eden. Remember they sinned, they got thrown out? And he says, well, life's going to be more difficult for you. Know? He says, you will return to the ground since from it you were taken for dust you are, and to dust you will return. No problems there? All right, we know that we're dust, that's where we're going to return. Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 says, the Lord God formed the man from the dust, yes, we agree with that, of the ground, and breathed into the nostrils the what? The breath of life, and the man became a living being. My friends, we give people the breath of life quite often. What is the breath of life? Some of you might have gone to the first aid courses and they talk about you have to give them the breath of life. And you sit there and go, where do I get that from? Yeah? You can't buy the breath of life. What are they talking about? They're talking about doing CPR, don't they? Breathing into people. The breath of life is just air that God breathed into a person to get them started. And people say, yeah, but listen, you know, in the old days, people used to see the spirit come out, so it must be a spirit. It is interesting because when you have a look back, people can say, yes, your spirit does go somewhere. And I've seen your spirit go somewhere, John. And you can see your own spirit go somewhere, my friends, if you go out into a cold morning and you breathe out, and what do you see? You what? Yeah, but people would say, there's your spirit. Right? In the old days when we weren't that clever, right, we didn't have all the scientific things, and people started to think, well, there is something inside of us, and we would die, and they would see this white cloud come out and it disappeared. And they said, there you go. That's your spirit. It just came out. Yeah. And it went back to God. What's the last thing that happens to us when we die? And I'm sorry for being harping on this. But what's the last thing that happens to us when we die? We exhale. Yeah. Because our lungs collapse. Right? And sometimes, for those who've been working in nursing homes or as a nurse, you find that when you move a person who's passed away, that they will actually groan at you, or they will make some sort of noise, and people go, oh, they're still alive. But that's just the air coming out of their lungs, yeah? It's just the air coming out of their lungs. Had we been able to bottle that white air or white substance that came out of people's mouths in the good old days, and we put it under the microscope now, we would find that it is what? Just air. Right? It is just air. Having said that, though, before you come rushing at me afterwards, Having said that though, the air that God breathes into us, the air that we breathe every day, in and out, when we do pass away, the air that comes out of us, where does it go? So your air comes out, and where's it go to? It goes back to God. It goes back into the atmosphere, yeah? Because that's where he got the air from. Breathe in. Who created the atmosphere air that we breathe? God in the first place. So your air does go back to God, all right? The air goes back to God. But there's no inner spirit, my friends, no little Andy that comes out when I die, yeah? He doesn't have me lined up there in a shelf up there in heaven somewhere just to put me together with my body when he comes back. That's not on. Yeah. And if God was only interested in some little inner person, then why is he coming back to collect the outer shell? Because the outer shell and the inner workings of my body is me, all of me. He's coming back for that. So then let us go back to the cemetery. The awkwardness that they had there. How could they have overcome that awkwardness? How could they have answered the question, if heaven is up, why are they putting Mum down in the ground? Why is she going down to hell? Because, my friends, if they'd seen their Bible, if they read their Bible, they would have been able to answer the question, wouldn't they? Remember this one. John chapter 3, verse 13. I know we always do the other one. What's the other one? John chapter 3, verse 16. We know that one like the back of our hands. No one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven. And who is that? And who's the Son of Man? Right. So when someone dies, they sleep in the ground until Christ comes back. They could have saved themselves a lot of hassles if they really understood their scriptures. My friends, why do we keep putting people down? Because no one goes to heaven until when? Till the second coming. We have a hope that Christ is coming back. And when he comes back, all those who are asleep on the ground will be raised and we'll be able to meet with them again. I look forward to that day, not only so that I can meet together again with all my church family, with my family, but also with my son, who passed away when he was only young. My friends, we have this hope. Hang on to that hope. The pain will last for quite some time, I must admit. But what gets you through is the hope and knowledge that when Christ comes back, your loved one will be there forever with you. Amen.